Good evening, everyone. If you have a booklet, go ahead and turn to page 24. And we're going to go ahead and get started right now. This is part 7, the last in this series. And I'm just afraid that I'll get to the end and not say some very important thank yous. So I first want to thank all of you for continuing to come. Secondly, I'd like to thank Aaron. Aaron put together the video every single time. It has worked perfectly every single time. I'm very, very happy with how that's gone, and he spent every Sunday afternoon having to do this as part of his job, and thank you, Aaron, for that. I want to thank my wife, who put up with all of the patience, in my learning curve and helping me in this project. Most of all, I want to thank God. I am just, in all of this, I have been built up so much in faith by what God has done in his creation. David says that he was fearfully and wonderfully made. And the word fearfully has never had so much meaning to me as it has since I've done this study. Long hours of reading and researching and looking at things. And it's a beautiful thing to look at what science says about the complexity of living organisms. And as you're reading it, you get a chill because you know that this could not happen by undirected chance. And it's just been a wonderful thing. So, as God has said in Romans, the 1st chapter, just look at the creation and you will recognize my divine power. And that truly has happened to me, and I'm thankful to God for that. Tonight, we have the fun fact of the day at the beginning. By the way, I want you to know, all the fun facts of the day none of them have come from a creationist website. They have all come from neutral websites or evolutionist websites, okay? And this is the fun fact of the day. One human DNA molecule contains enough information to fill a 1 million-page encyclopedia. It's just, things like that are just quite stunning to me, and it's an amazing thing. But we're looking at this very, very famous, iconic picture. In fact, if you Google evolution and you Google images on evolution, this will be one of the 3 images, if not the first image, that you see when you Google it. This is the most iconic image of evolution. And so tonight we're going to be looking at from ape to man, or hominids. And in your booklet, you have a definition of the hominids there. And it's any of a family of erect, that means standing up straight, bipedal, means it has 2 feet, primate mammals that includes recent humans together with extinct ancestral and related forms, and in some recent classifications, the gorilla, chimpanzee, and the orangutan. Okay? There are some people who would disagree that Darwin stated that man had evolved from monkeys or had evolved from primates, and that is classically not true. Okay? He has said this in his book, The Descent of Man. My object is to show that there is no fundamental difference between man and the higher animals in their mental faculties. That's quite an interesting thought, that he said we don't have any better mental faculty than the higher primates. In another place in The Descent of Man, he clearly stated that he believed that man was descended from old world monkeys. Now, I learned this last time that a monkey is just an ape, an ape is a monkey without a tail, basically. So, but he believed that we were in the lineage of old world monkeys. So to actually state that Darwin believed in a transitional form where man had an ancestor that was a monkey is true, and he did believe that. Now, although Darwin did not talk a lot about the origin of man in his famous book, Origin of the Species, he did argue that human species fundamentally were no different than any other species, and that we all shared that common ancestor. In other words, we all began with some living form way back when that first life form began, and then branched out into all the species over a gradual, million-year period. But we want to ask the question tonight, where does the evidence actually lead us? And that's what we've been asking each time that we've looked at this. One of the things that I think is important for us to do is look at early hominid finds. Now, I'm not choosing these on purpose to make fun of evolution. I really am not. I'm choosing these because these are some of the classic finds of hominids, and I put that in quote. Ape men is basically what that word means, or transitional men, women in our ancestry, according to evolutionists. I have chosen these because they are famous, and because they really tell the history of the hominid finds. And the first one is Java man, and we're going to discuss that tonight, discovered in 1891 near the island of Java, and we'll find out how that was discovered and what scientists think of it today. Piltdown man, discovered in Piltdown, England, called for the gravel pit in Piltdown, a little small town in England in 1912. Nebraska man, found obviously in Nebraska in 1922, okay? And then Zinjanthropus, which was discovered in 1959 in Tanzania. That's the one that has a really tough name to it. So let's take a look at Java man. This is the artist's rendition of what Java man was supposed to look like. And Java man is a find of a skull cap, a thigh bone. Now, skull cap is just what you've got up here on the skull, okay? It's no jawbone, all right? So it's a skull cap, it is a thigh bone, and 3 teeth. And Eugene Dubois is the one who found this. He went searching for the missing link, okay? He died believing he had found the missing link, no matter how many scientists stated that he had problems in his find, okay? But at any rate, he wanted to get money, a grant, to go find the missing link, but no one would give it to him, so he joined the military, because most people believed that the missing links would be found in Africa. And the reason why they thought that is because there are so many monkeys, gorillas, apes, chimps, etc. in Africa. And since they had already determined that those had to be in the lineage of man, that's where they thought they would find the missing links. Therefore, most of them went to Africa. So he joined the military and ended up in an island called Java and did some excavations there and found this. Now, there was great debate immediately over whether or not he had found a human ancestor, and there still is great debate as to whether or not he found a human ancestor. This is the popular name given to the early fossils that he actually found. He argued that the fossils represented a missing link between apes and humans, and he gave it a scientific name, Anthropopithecus erectus. In other words, anthro meaning man. Pithecus means just ape. So ape man that stood up, erect, upright, okay? And then it aroused so much controversy that about 80 books or articles had been published on Dubois' find in about 10 years. So going back and forth as to whether or not this was truly an ape man. Most scientists now believe that the thigh bone found a year later and about 50 feet away from the original skull cap and tooth is an actual human find, and that the teeth are an actual orangutan. And so once again, if this is evidence of a hominid, it is way too debatable for it to be thought of as one of the hominids in evolution. Despite the lack of evidence and the lack of consensus among anthropologists and paleontologists, Time magazine article in 1994 treated Java man as one of the ancestors and just stated that it was one of our ancestors. And it comes out in obviously when it comes out in a magazine like that, that's pretty major. Piltdown man is one, and again, I say I'm not bringing this up because I'm trying to make fun of evolutionists. I'm bringing this up because this is the history of hominids. Piltdown man was found in 1912, okay? Now this was collected from a gravel pit, as I said, in Piltdown, England. Charles Dawson and company put it together, okay? But in doing so, the fragments consisted of parts of a skull and a jawbone this time. But it was very well put together and quite interesting. In the 1920s and the 30s, there were certain scientists that began to look at this original 1912 excavation, and they thought, you know what? They called into authenticity this actual find in the first place. But it wasn't until 1953 that this was exposed as a purposeful hoax and forgery. What someone had done is taken an actual human find skull and put it together with the jawbone of an ape. The human part of the skull was dated at 600 years old, okay? Put it together with that, and then took a tooth from an orangutan and actually filed it down so that it would look more human-like. And by 1953, when the scientific conference came about and exposed it as a forgery, it had been out there for 40 years being used as a legitimate find. Okay, now that you say, well, why would an evolutionist, why would a scientist ever do anything like that? Scientists are supposed to be committed to things that are factual like that. It's because of this sense that I found in my research. It's this sense that if it is true, then we must find these transitional species. That's how badly they want to find them, because lacking that evidence puts you in a position of having your critics say you don't have enough evidence to state that evolution is a fact. So that is probably the most famous anthropological hoax that was ever perpetrated, and it went on for 40 years. And that's pretty bad that someone would do something like that. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that all scientists are like that. I'm not suggesting for a moment that all evolutionists are like that. Nebraska man is one that just, it just kind of puts me aback when I hear about this. I'm obviously disgusted with what Piltdown man had as going on, but Nebraska man was found by Harold Cook in a Nebraska field, but he only found a tooth. But they said it looked remarkably like either a human or extinct animal that was human-like tooth in this area. They'd never seen anything like it. And as a result of that, Science magazine, 2 months later, announced that an ape man had been discovered in North America, and they featured this picture in Science magazine. Now, even Harold Cook and the others that saw this picture come out, they even stated that you can't know that the ape man looked like this by simply finding a tooth. More excavations were made on this. In 1925, it was revealed that it was the tooth of an extinct pig, species of pig. And yet, this comes out in a magazine, a highly touted scientific magazine, and was stated that we've found the ape man of North America on the basis of a tooth. Okay, now again, that tooth looked very, very human-like. A molar looked that way to them, or very ape-like, and because they had classified it as something that was much more ancient than what they thought modern man could be, they came to the conclusion that it had to be this. But later they found out it was just an extinct species of pig. Science magazine reprinted or printed a retraction in 1927. It took them 2 years to print the retraction, but 2 months to put that out. I thought that was interesting too. Okay, the next one is Zinjanthropus, 1959. This is found by very, very famous anthropologist, Mary Leakey. She's mentioned in my social studies book that I taught at school. In East Africa, it is considered the most well-preserved skull ever found, in the sense of something that is prehistoric, okay? And so an artist's rendition of Zinjanthropus is right there. You'll find that in museums, and he looks like this. He is, even though it was considered a well-preserved skull, there were over 400 pieces that they had to put together in order to make the skull, if in fact all of those pieces were part of that skull. So sometimes when you hear well-preserved, it is something that you have to really look at. Well, how did it actually come out of the ground? And I'm not saying that all of those pieces weren't part of that skull. I don't know, okay? I am just saying that they had to put together 400 pieces in order to come up with this very well-preserved skull. It was supposed to be the first hominid to use tools. Mary and Louis Leakey are very famous anthropologists. They were working as a team. Again, they were wanting to find missing links. They were looking in Africa. They were well-funded. Richard Leakey is the son. He is a famous anthropologist as well. He declared this to be the first hominid to use tools. However, the discovery today is now clouded by doubt and recent finds, and the husband, Louis Leakey, actually stated, now, this is a non-human vegetarian of very, very low intelligence. It's not this. Now, Mary Leakey still states it is so. And so, once again, this is something, if you go back to your booklet now, and you just take a look at this, I'm going to make a statement here that I think is really important for you to look at. In the past, fossil remains that were concluded to be ancestors of humans were often later determined to be chimpanzees, apes, or other primates, or they were actually determined to be extinct forms of apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, etc., that we just did not know about. So it's extremely hard in order to put together some outward morphology, some shape to these by looking simply at fossils that you find, okay? One of the things I think that is really exciting to think about is what this, now remember, he's an evolutionist. This is Dr. Michael Denton, and his book is called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis. He is an agnostic when it comes to God. He says, I don't know whether God exists or not, but he has some real problems with evolution. But listen to what he says here. The systematic status and biological affinity of a fossil organism is far more difficult to establish than in the case of a living form, and can never be established with any degree of certainty. To begin with, 99% of the biology of, now that's the biology of any organism resides in its soft anatomy, which is inaccessible in a fossil. He goes on to state, listen, if we never knew what a marsupial looked like, and we found the fossil remains of marsupials, we would never know that that's how they gave birth. We would never know that it was different from an animal, a mammal, that gave birth through a placenta. And so when you compare the two, you have to understand that what we see in science textbooks and what we see in museums, especially if they're looking at a fossil remains, they have had to build this. This is an artist rendition of what they have come to conclude about this particular find. So D are my words. This is kind of my conclusion. And then I'm going to take any questions before we go on to the most popular and famous fossil find or hominid find, which is called Lucy. So look at this. I want you to know that D is not in quotes because it's not taken from a scientific textbook, okay? With regard to the number of fossil finds that paleontologists state could be the ancestors of the modern human, the scientific community has debated the dates of the finds, debated the veracity of the finds, and debated the scientific extrapolations of the finds. The scientific community has debated all of these. There's not one that they've come to a consensus on, not one that they say, this is it. It is a transitional form, and 90+% of all scientists are agreeing on that. Be assured of this, no one has been able to assemble any fossil finds into an array of transitional species that determine an evolutionary lineage of the modern human. The above drawing is not based on scientifically verified fossil finds. It is an artist's rendition of human evolution, but oh, how iconic it has become. No one has ever been able to get that picture that you have on page 24 from fossil finds. And yet, you'll see it everywhere, and it gives kids and young adults the idea that there is science behind this gradual evolution of ape to man. Any questions at this point? Any comments? We're going to be looking at some things. Yes, Rick.
You just said about the soft tissue find, and then you said some word that I didn't understand what you're talking about, that there was a bird through. What's that?
Oh, marsupial? A marsupial, I'm sorry, that's a kangaroo-like. That's got a pouch. Okay, so that's a very, very different type of reproductive system, you know, for a marsupial. That's a pouched animal. And yet you would not know that by looking at just the skeletal fossil finds. Okay, Joel?
I'm assuming that there have been fossil finds of ancient orangutans, ancient chimpanzees that nobody questions. That was a chimpanzee. That wasn't the missing link. They've obviously found fossilized human remains. That's a human being. That's not a missing link. So it isn't like they haven't found anything else. It's just they haven't found that one that they can splice together close enough to say that that must be it.
I think I'm not going to make any conclusion like that until the end, because I want you to go through this next process here before I give you my conclusion. I just want to give this conclusion here at this point, and I want to address that later. Can I do that, Joel? Thank you. Dan?
This iconic drawing of the ape morphing into man, is that still, is it still popular among evolutionists today in the sense that they say, look, there's no science behind it, but it is a good illustration of what we believe happened?
Okay, those are the words, Dan, that I hear over and over again whenever something that evolutionists put up as iconic. They know, in fact, it is a false representation, like Haeckel's embryos. They were fudged, they were faked, they were actually done in a way to make the embryos look like they all started out looking exactly the same way and then went into some different type of species. Okay, so yes, that's what I keep hearing, even from Eugenie Scott, who's a proponent of evolution. That's what she'll say about these things. And you heard her on the video. She says, but it gets the point across. It may be false, but it gets the point across. So yes, this iconic picture of the ape to man gets the point across. It illustrates the fact of evolution, is what they're going to say. Okay? So let's go on now and look at Australopithecus afarensis, or Lucy, as she is commonly called. Now, I kind of made fun of that word when I was trying to get you excited about coming to hear this, because I said, what if your kid came home one day and said, Mom, Dad, we learned about Australopithecus afarensis at school today? Okay. Well, the fact of the matter is that I taught out of a textbook that had this in it, that had Australopithecus afarensis Lucy in it. And the next words that you will see are all from this textbook called A Message of Ancient Days, pages 90 to 92 in the California Adopted Social Studies textbook. Now, I love that textbook for one reason, because I had to teach ancient Israelite history and Christianity and Roman history as they conflicted together. And the Bible was allowed for me in all of those senses to be read in class, the stories to be told, for me to go about and teach about Christianity, not try to convert them, but teach them about Christianity, was something that I got to do every day in school during the times when I taught about ancient Israelite history. But it had an early man part to it. And it stated this. And it states it discovered by, these bones were discovered by Don Johansen. They were an exceptionally complete skeleton of an early human ancestor. So it just states it right there as a fact that this is an early human ancestor. Lucy is over 3 million years old and one of the oldest skeletons ever found in this case. By piecing together these bone fragments, Johansen found that Lucy was only about 3.5 feet tall, shorter than the average 5-year-old today. From the size and the shape of the leg bones, now notice that, they determined that she walked upright. Okay? So she is considered this transitional species. Don't be put off by the Australopithecus afarensis type thing. Australo just means southern, like Australia is in the southern hemisphere. And Pithecus means ape, so it means southern ape, and afarensis means it was found in Africa. And by the way, it's kind of funny how it got its name, because when Johansen and the company discovered these bones, and they were very, very excited about it, the Beatles' song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was very popular, and so they just decided to name her Lucy. By the way, some scientists believe that she's not a she, that she is actually a he now. So it is kind of a funny name. So what we're going to see now in just a moment, we are going to be looking at a video for about 10 minutes, and we are going to be looking at a video that is done by Dr. David Minton. He is a biomedical research technician at the Mayo Clinic. He is a professor of anatomy at Washington University School of Medicine, and he is a believer. He is a creationist. And so what we're going to do is we're going to see his thoughts on Lucy from a video that is called Lucy, She's No Lady. Okay? So here we go.
This is the skull of Australopithecus afarensis, and when we look at the skull, right away we see that this is not a human skull. The most dramatic thing is, look at the face here. It slopes at an angle. We call this sort of a shovel face. And the human face goes up and down more vertically. This slopes. And the canines come in at a steep angle here, where human teeth would come down straight, the incisors and canines. The brow ridges are relatively large. There are some human beings, Australian Aboriginal, for example, that'll have a somewhat enlarged brow ridge. Neanderthal man had an enlarged brow ridge, probably not to the degree that we see here. But to me, the distinctive feature is the slope of the face. Very, very small cranial capacity. Cranial capacity of Lucy was small even by ape standards, so we're not going to confuse this skull with an ape. Another feature that I'll have occasion to bring up for those of you that want to stop by the table we'll be setting up tomorrow morning. I have $3,000 worth of hominid skull replicas, museum quality replicas with me, so you can kind of handle some of these skulls, including Lucy and even Piltdown Man and Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Australopithecus robustus, Africanus, afarensis, the Tong's child. I have life-size museum quality replicas of all of these. And when you look at them, you'll notice, when you compare them to human skulls, apes lack nasal bones. I always tell folks that if you just remember this, you'll have a good memory jog. Apes have trouble keeping their glasses up. If you feel right here where your glasses set, if you wear them, there's a pair of bones that come together here called the nasal bones. Apes don't have nasal bones. And then if you put the finger under the nose and you come up, there's a little bony spine that stops your finger from coming up. And that's called the nasal spine, and apes don't have a nasal spine. What do apes have? Well, if you look at the front of the ape here, no nasal bones, no nasal spine. If you look from the front, it looks like a jack-o'-lantern. You know how you cut the nose in the jack-o'-lantern? It's a triangular hole. That's the way this cavity looks in an ape. It's a rather just a triangular hole, whereas in human we have this, this distinctive bone structure. So all of these features are lacking. Is there anything about this skull that might get evolutionists excited? Well, the teeth are relatively small for an ape. There are other apes that have relatively small teeth, Theropithecus gelata and others. Another feature that excites people is that the teeth of the Australopithecines tend to have relatively thick enamel. You see, apes have, by and large, thin enamel, and humans have relatively thick enamel. But it turns out that there are some apes alive today that have relatively thick enamel, like the orangutan. And so the thickness of the enamel probably relates more to diet than it does to any kind of an evolutionary scenario or paradigm. Well, let's look at other parts of Lucy. It seems like every major city has their own Lucy statue these days if you go around to the different museums. And this is St. Louis's statue, so if you don't mind, I'll just focus on St. Louis's statue. This was built about, probably 15 years ago or more now. And when we look at this statue, it's very lifelike. It has real hair in the surface, and it's standing about this tall, not very tall. And if you look at the mannequin, you see some distinctive features. First of all, very ape-like head. But the trunk and the breasts and the genitalia are distinctly human for a female. The arms and the hands are distinctly human, though possibly a little bit longer proportion-wise than most modern humans. The legs and feet are very human. In fact, look at this leg. If you were to shave that leg, it could be used in a Hanes ad, I would think. And notice that Lucy knows a little bit about modeling, too. As every good model knows, if you point the toe, it tends to extend the leg. And she appears to be doing a bit of that. Also, the hand up like this and pensively looking off in the air tells you that very likely Johansen had found a fossilized thought. And I happen to know what the thought is that she's thinking at this very moment. She's just thinking, I don't have a thing to wear. But you see, once again, the artist is editorializing and fictionalizing, I believe, by putting into this creature this pensive look, this gaze, which leads one to believe that it is thinking. Well, given the fact that from the neck on down, this is essentially a human body, and from the neck on up, it is sadly an ape head, primitive even by ape standards, it has a powerful effect on people that go through the zoo. I've stood there and watched young children in particular go through big groups of them with classes. And you'll hear things like, oh, look, Mrs. Ferguson, an ape man. And Mrs. Ferguson points out, no, Johnny, that is an ape woman. So it's even politically correct, very difficult to deal with it. But see, you wouldn't have to know how to pronounce or spell Australopithecus afarensis. If you're a child, you just go through the museum, you look at it, ape head, human body, the message is very powerful. Now, this is a complete misrepresentation of the way Lucy looks, and the zoo has admitted that they were aware of this at the time they built the mannequin. But they do not intend to change it because, as they have pointed out, it gets across the point they want to make to the audience at large. What are the obvious misrepresentations here? Well, first of all, the hands and the feet. Let's just take a look at a little more detail here. There's the hand. You could play piano with a hand like this. or violin. Notice that the finger bones are straight. The whole hand has a very human-like quality. Apes have curved fingers. The finger bones, the phalanges, instead of being relatively straight, have a curvature to them, and so they have a kind of a meat hook looking hand that's quite distinctive, very well suited for being suspensory adapted or hanging from a limb, but not great for playing piano or pipe organ. Lucy here, the way she is shown, would be very good at the latter, not very good at hanging from limbs. Well, we know this isn't the case because even before the exhibit was made in the St. Louis Zoo, Stern and Sussman had published a paper in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology, a rather sizable one at that. And in this paper, they looked at many of the Hadar Australopithecines, that is, of the type that Lucy represents, and they compared the curvature of her finger bones. Remember, Lucy herself didn't have finger bones, but there have been other specimens of Australopithecus afarensis that do, and so these bones have been compared, and you see them after the AL333 figure here, and the data points are here, and they're being compared to human, which is here, and other living apes. And what we see is, as you look at each of the different finger bones for living apes versus human versus Lucy, is that with an exceptional data point here and there, which may be a fragmentary fossil, the cluster is actually towards the most curved of the ape phalanges. So we could say that Lucy had highly curved fingers or phalanges by ape standards, the typical suspensory adapted type of hand. And this is not the hand shown on the creature that we have in the St. Louis Zoo. Now let's take a look at the feet. Well, first we'll say what Stern and Sussman concluded about the hand, then we'll look at the feet. Their conclusion was that a summary of the morphological and functional affinities of the Hadar hand leads inexorably to an image of a suspensory adapted hand, that is, hanging from a limb of a tree, surprisingly similar to the hands found in the small end of the pygmy chimp, common chimp range. So it would be completely inappropriate for anyone to paint or make a model of Lucy showing anything other than highly curved fingers. Another recent observation that was published is that these particular Australopithecines, which include afarensis, have been found to have locking wrist bones. And this is found in knuckle walkers. So that if you really wanted to show Lucy properly in the zoo, it would be a good idea to get her down on her knuckles, as any proper ape would be, doing a bit of knuckle walking. But that wouldn't get the impression across that certainly our zoo in St. Louis wants to get across, and I doubt many will go for it.
Okay, I want to be able to state right here, he goes on to talk more about the foot, etc., but what I want to be able to do is tell you that if you look in your booklet, look at the fossil find. Do you see hands or feet there? No, you do not. So you might be wondering, well, this man, this Dr. Minton, is talking about the hands and the feet being as arboreal, meaning tree-dwelling-like. And if you take a look at the gorilla foot here and the human foot, or you take a look at other kinds of chimp feet, etc., you will notice that they're separated. This part of the anatomy is separated a large way in order for them to grasp with the foot. Now I know there's human beings that have no arms that have learned to grasp with their feet. Okay, but that is a terrifically hard thing to do. We do not naturally grasp with our feet. Okay, and so what Dr. Minton is trying to say is that the other Australopithecines that were found in the area, they did find hands and feet to them, but they were arboreal type. They were curved. They were meant to be able to tree dwell. But that's not what you see when you see Lucy in our textbooks. That's not what you see when you see Lucy in the museums. She is not portrayed that way. She is portrayed very, very human-like. Now, it goes on to state, and there is a lot of controversy about the hip. Creationists have gone crazy about what was done to the hip. When the hip bone was found, you see it right there, when that hip bone was found, information that I saw in there stated that one paleontologist said that hip bone had to have been crushed before it was fossilized by another walking mammal or something that crushed it, because this is not consistent with the hip bone with the rest of this fossil find. I don't know whether that's true or not. I just know that what he did in order to change that is he made a replica of the hip that was found, and then he broke it apart, and then he kind of whittled it down with different kinds of files, an electric file, filed it down, and then said, this is what it looks like. Well, the result of that, this is what it actually looked like, was to look much more like a human hip than an ape hip, okay? So there is great debate over whether or not that was done as a way of advocacy, whether it was truly crushed in the beginning and it shouldn't look like that. I don't happen to know whether other hip bones of Australopithecines have been found, and they are definitely different than the one in the Lucy find. That would be interesting to look up. Again, I'm going to tell you there's great debate about that. Now you see the hands there, and you'll see the human hand is not really meant for tree dwelling. Although you can make a human suspend from, bars all the time. We do that in the Olympics, etc. But it's not for going back and forth with a hand and a foot, and that's what the rest of the Australopithecines in the area looked like. And so I'm just trying to tell you that once again, what you see so many times is like what Dr. Minton says. You find these fossils, but it's data poor and imagination rich. That's how he puts it. And so you come to this conclusion, which I'm going to get back with what Joel said in just a moment. What's the actual evidence that we have found? And I'm going to give you, at the end of these two slides, your reference points there. One of the two knee joints was found 70 meters below the other remains, okay? According to Richard Leakey, Lucy's skull was made up mostly of imagination made of plaster of Paris. Bone structure similar to orangutan and spider monkey, both good tree climbers, but very clumsy walkers. Feet and hands are tree climbers, but not efficient for running, okay? Brain smaller than modern chimp or gorilla. If we had had time tonight, I would have loved to have shown you Dr. Minton's part where he explained how incredibly different the human foot is. There is no foot like it in all of life organisms. And it is an amazing thing that we do in walking the way we walk, okay? Going on, ribs were rounded like ape-like, but the rib cage is conical and not barrel-like, which is ape-like again. The shoulders are high, ape-like again. The thorax is pot-bellied, ape-like again. The height is the height of a chimp. The V-shaped jaw is chimp-like. The arms are as long as legs. That means they're chimp-like, and you don't see that in the Lucy display. And they are more arboreal than upright. That is chimp-like again, and there are your sources. So you say, okay, so should Lucy be stated in a California textbook for 6th graders as a human ancestor? Well, no, I don't think so. But if you ask an evolutionist, they would say, yes, I think so. And this gets to what Joel was saying, okay? As Dr. Minton put it, he said, you're going to find apes in the fossils. You're going to find humans in the fossils. You're going to find ape men in the fossils. And he says, what I mean by that is fossils of apes that have been joined with fossils of humans, and they look like, to the evolutionists, as ape men. Okay? So that's the problem. My conclusion is going to be basically this. The hard evidence just isn't there. It's debated too much by too many scientists of repute, by evolutionists of repute, that this find is not what you say it is. It's not a transitional find. It is not an ape man. Oh, yes, it is, or no, it isn't. But it gets the point across to go ahead and show that iconic representation of ape to man. Look at these final words on Lucy is what I would just call, I know this isn't the true final word, but it's going to be our final word on Lucy. From an evolutionist. Dr. Charles Oxnard completed the most sophisticated computer analysis of Australopithecine fossils ever undertaken and concluded that the Australopithecines have nothing to do with the ancestry of man whatsoever and are simply an extinct form of ape. And here are his, this is in Fossils, Teeth, and Sex, New Perspectives on Human Evolution, University of Washington Press, 1987. Yes, Joel?
So they didn't find one Australopithecus afarensis. They found several.
They did. They found more in the same area.
Close enough to where they could say, yeah.
Yes. So here's the hands and feet that Lucy had, and they knew that even before, as Dr. Minton said, they created this Lucy-like figure in the museums that obviously has hands and feet that are not like the other Australopithecines that you find in that particular dig area. Yes. Okay. And then I like what this Harvard evolutionist says, and he sums it all up this way. He was asked to write a book review, not a book review, but a foreword to a certain book on evolution of man. And this is what he said. My reservations concern not so much this book, but the whole subject of paleoanthropology. But introducing books or book reviews are hardly the place to argue that perhaps generations of students of human evolution, including myself, have been flailing about in the dark, that our database is too sparse, too slippery for it to be able to mold our theories. Rather, the theories are more statements about us and ideology than about the past. Paleoanthropology reveals more about how humans view themselves than it does about how humans came about. But that is heresy. Emphasis and color are mine in his quote. And this is David Pilbeam, Harvard paleontologist and evolutionist, curator of paleoanthropology at the Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, member of the National Academy of Sciences. So my conclusion is this. If one says that they can found the theory of evolution as a fact based upon the transitional forms for human evolution, I just say there's not enough evidence to convince me that they found anything. There's not enough evidence. And even in the scientific world, there's not enough evidence. But as I said last week, that high school biology textbook is going to state that evolution is a fact, and it's going to state that these iconic pictures are good ways of getting across that fact to kids, even though these iconic pictures and drawings, etc., are false. Some of them false from the beginning, like Haeckel's embryos. That's quite interesting to me. So I want to read to you on page 25 just this part that Jonathan Wells put in his book, Icons of Evolution. He states this. So once again, we have to ask, or this is my statement, is the iconic representation of the evolution of man that we see in almost every science textbook and every museum's paleontological display founded by evidence or by the notion that since evolution is regarded as fact, it has to be so? In 1996, Berkeley evolutionary biologist F. Clark Howell wrote, "There is no encompassing theory of human evolution. Alas, there really never has been." Jonathan Wells quotes him in his book, Icons of Evolution, and writes the following in regard to another evolutionist, F. Clark Howell, a statement that says this: Howell's pessimism was echoed by Arizona State University anthropologist Jeffrey Clark in 1997. Quote, "Scientists have been trying to arrive at a consensus about modern human origins for more than a century. Why haven't they been successful? In Clark's opinion, it is because anthropologists proceed from such different biases, preconceptions, and assumptions. Thus, explanatory models of human evolution, according to Clark, quote, are little more than a house of cards, revoke one card, and the whole structure of inference is threatened with collapse. I want to end by saying this that David said, for you formed me in my inward parts, you formed my inward parts, you wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. I'm not convinced by what the evidence states that evolution is a fact. I'm not convinced because the cosmos and the universe does not convince me. It convinces me otherwise. Since it is expanding, it indicates that there had to be a beginning. Since it is so precise in all of its gravitational type and its elemental type balances, it is too precise to be the result of some undirected explosion that almost always brings chaos in what we find in explosions. I am not convinced that natural selection can account for all the major phyletic differences that we see today. Natural selection is a scientific fact. It is observable today. But to extrapolate from that it gives the reason and the basis for gradualism is again not observable today. It is only observable in microevolution, not macro. I am not convinced that homologous structures or similar structures or even homologous genetic structures from one species to another can account for our ancestry. The fact of the matter is that if God intended to put one gene in one animal and one gene in the human being that were alike, or a structure in an animal and a structure in us that were alike, it just simply means that the designer is using the same design mechanism that works for that particular living organism. It doesn't necessarily follow that it comes from an account of our ancestry. I am not convinced that the obvious evidence of microevolution demands the theory of macroevolution. Just because you see finches' beaks get larger during times of drought, just because we can genetically modify a fruit fly and put 4 wings on it instead of 2 wings on it, just because we can see the effects of microevolution over time in certain living organisms does not mean, and it does not follow in my mind, that one species led to another species, that a reptile actually led to birds. That does not necessarily follow in my mind, especially with the idea of irreducible complexity. And when I look at David's statement about fearfully and wonderfully made, there are times when I have just been fearful of God, when I have looked at the scientific evidence of some of our bodily systems and how amazingly complex they are. I'm not convinced that genetic mutations, which are almost always harmful or neutral, could account for the mutations that had to take place, and especially in large numbers, if you believe in punctuated equilibrium and no longer believe in the gradualism that Darwin put out there in the beginning, that those mutations had to take place in such large numbers that I am not convinced that they would bring about beneficial higher levels of species working up to man, etc., all the way to what we see in modern man today. I'm not convinced that the fossil record supports gradualism, and I'm not convinced that it even supports punctuated equilibrium, and that evolutionists have proved, I am not convinced, that humans have an ancestry line of transitional hominids. I don't think the facts are there. It doesn't lead me to that conclusion. Thank you very much. I have so much enjoyed doing this for you. Let's, to answer your question, to make sure I answer it correctly, I don't know, and I don't think scientists know when something is truly human and when something is truly chimp-like, unless it mimics exactly what we see in modern humans or modern chimps today. The fact of the matter is that at this time, many scientists believe that the Australopithecines are an extinct form of ape. So that's something we've never seen before, where we don't see. So the fact that they might have more human-like characteristics does not mean that that is in our lineage, that that is a hominid, so to speak, or an ape man. It just means that there are some aspects of the fossil remains that may look more human in that case.